couple of new faces that I would like to introduce to yourselves. They are both IPs, independent persons, who we recognised and admitted at the last meeting that we held. Simon Openshaw, if you'd like to identify yourself. And Arnie Bezic. Obviously, their roles will be largely in relation to liaison work and working on various cases with the monitoring officer team. They will attend meetings as and when it's appropriate, but they wouldn't normally be part and parcel of the process of democracy within our committee. So, as I say, welcome one and all. Do we have any apologies?
Yes, apologies from Councillors Reid and Bridget and from Karen Milner.
Thank you very much. We are all pretty much old hands at this in terms of the second item, which is the the disclosures of interest. You have all made your necessary disclosures, I believe, unless there is anything pertinent to the business of today that anybody wishes to raise. Thank you. If we could then go on to the agenda, which is item 3, the minutes of the previous meeting. They have been circulated. I've had the opportunity to look at them. What we're looking at here is, are they accurate, are they correct, and are you prepared to accept them as a true record? Thank you. Oh, sorry. Yeah, could I have a mover? I think we had Councillor Stewart as a mover and seconded by Councillor Flux. Thank you for that, members. The fourth item is a fairly substantial item, and for that reason we do have a number of guests. We have Gillian Marshall, who some of you may know from the advisory board that's been set up following the Cala report. And I hope, once she introduces herself, will give us some context as to why item 4 comes before you today. And the other party is Simon Gocher, who is actually the author of the report. And obviously Simon will speak more fully in relation to that report, and then we can determine where we stand in terms of recommendations thereafter. So if I could initially invite Gillian to introduce herself and perhaps give us some context in relation to the report, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Can I check you can hear me okay?
Yeah.
Lovely, thank you. Morning, Chair, morning, members. I'm Gillian Marshall. I am the Monitoring Officer for Wakefield Metropolitan District Council in West Yorkshire. I've been a Monitoring Officer for 10 years in a couple of councils, and I am part of the LGA board that is helping Northumberland post the Cala report, and I'm on the board because of the Monitoring Officer and governance roles and experience that I have. Obviously, one of the things that Cala said was around the use of the standards process and how complaints were handled in the past, and how there was a need to move forward with that and perhaps make some tweaks and changes to your processes. I've been working very closely with your Monitoring Officer Suki over the last couple of months since September, when I've been part of the Challenge Board, and Suki has kindly briefed me on the position that you're at with complaints that date back to pre-Cala or around the Cala time, but also a lot of the changes that have already been made to your processes and procedures. So what we thought was helpful from the Challenge Board point of view is to ask somebody to just have a look at the procedures that you've got in place now, perhaps to assess them against any national guidance or best practice, just so that you could have either assurance that you are exactly where you need to be, or some suggestions for further improvements if you wanted to take those. So with that in mind, I've instructed Simon to do a desktop review, not only of the processes that you have now, but of how the complaints in the past were handled, particularly those that seem to have taken quite a long time to move through your processes for various reasons. I must stress that we have not looked at the outcome of the complaints. We've not gone into the detail of them. It's been about the processes and whether your new processes would now move any complaints that you get in the future appropriately and swiftly through your processes in the best interests of the council. So if that's okay, as an introduction, Chair, I would bring Simon in to talk to his report.
Thank you, Gillian. Yeah, Simon, if you're good and ready, if you wouldn't mind talking to the report. Do you mind if we have questions from the members once you've finished your presentation?
Yeah, very, very happy to answer any questions.
Thank you.
So thank you, and thanks to Gillian for instructing us to do this piece of work, and thank you for inviting me along this morning to speak to the report. Just by way of background about me, I'm head of local government at Waitmans. We're a law firm that does a lot of work for the public sector and particularly for local authorities. I head up our local government team, so I'm responsible for all of the work that we do for local authorities. Excuse me. I've been at Waitmans now for 10 years, but prior to that I worked in local government myself for nearly 20 years. And the last 8 years of that, or thereabouts, I was a monitoring officer of two authorities, a metropolitan council and a unitary authority. A lot of my practice is involved in advising local authorities on standards matters and carrying out standards investigations myself. So I'm very familiar with this area of work and have done standards investigations for tens of authorities over the last 10 years. So what I've done, as Gillian says, is I've looked particularly at your process, looked at it against best practice guidance, and looked specifically at a number of complaints which were outsourced either for assessment or investigation, and identified some issues that I think are worthy of consideration for you, and perhaps some recommendations in terms of how you might take your process forward. As Gillian said, and I think it's really important to note, I was looking purely at process, not the outcomes of those matters, and also I was only looking at the documentation which I was provided with. So I didn't speak to anybody involved in any of the investigations or assessments. So I've purely based my views and my recommendations on the documentation with which I've been provided. I set out a summary of what I've done and my findings at page 11 of your agenda pack. And I've set out what I've done, sort of very summary findings, which I'll go through in a little more detail as I take you through the report. I think the headline outcome, which may be of no surprise to you, is that actually a lot of the assessments and investigations took a lot longer than would be suggested by the best practice guidance, and in our experience would be usual in these sorts of cases. But there are a number of specific contextual factors which apply in respect of your authority and in respect of those complaints, which can explain perhaps why they took a lot longer than you would have hoped they would have done, or they would normally be expected to. And again, I've summarised those, but have a little bit more detail as I go further into the report. And they are some changes within the council, and particularly in the monitoring officer team. For example, the solicitors who were instructed by the council's then monitoring officer to carry out a number of investigations. The monitoring officer then left. Then there was a deputy monitoring officer liaising with them. They then left, and the deputy monitoring officers had limited capacity and experience in dealing with these sorts of issues. The solicitors particularly found difficulties in engagement from the parties to the complaints. To an element, they found also that the goalposts were being moved in terms of issues being raised, and the position of the complainants and the subject members as they went through the investigations. There were some linked processes and procedures which affected the ability to progress the complaints. There was the volume of complaints that you were receiving and that the solicitors, particularly who carried out the investigations, were having to deal with at the same time. And they were quite complex in terms of the time period which the complaints spanned and the number of allegations that were being made. And as has been mentioned, there were issues specifically identified about the way the complaints process was being used, which were referred to in the Cala report, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. So I think that the headlines are they do appear to have been taking a lot longer to conclude and deal with than you would expect, but there are some mitigating and contextual factors which explain why that might be the case. It does appear that the council could have been more proactive in managing the way the complaints were being dealt with by those external providers. And we've set out some recommendations in paragraph 6 as to what the council might do to try and ensure that these processes are more proactively managed in the future. But I'll talk about those as I go through the report and explain why I think those recommendations are ones that the council should consider. Just by way of context, at paragraph 8 of my report, which is at page 13 of your agenda pack, I set out the documents which I considered as part of the desktop review. And I do that because it's important for you to understand that they are the documents that I considered and the only documents that I considered when I carried out this desktop review. So they inform the whole of the report and the recommendations that I've made. Then at paragraphs 10 to 16 of my report, which is at pages 13 to 15, I set out the law and guidance on how local authorities in England need to deal with complaints about members of their authorities allegedly failing to comply with the code of conduct. And the key elements from a legal point of view are that every relevant authority other than a parish council must put in place arrangements for dealing with allegations that members of their council, and if they are responsible for parish councils in their area, any allegations that those members have failed to comply with the code. But that's all the law says. The law does not actually say anything about what those arrangements must include and how they must be managed. So it's for each individual local authority to determine its own arrangements. But clearly the overriding obligation on each authority is that those arrangements must be fair to all of the parties involved, particularly the complainants and the member being complained about. These arrangements were introduced by the Localism Act, so they've been in place for over a decade now, but there was no guidance on the handling of complaints until relatively recently when, following recommendations for the Committee on Standards and Public Life about trying to achieve some more consistency across the way that complaints are managed in England, the LGA produced some model guidance in September 2021 on the handling of complaints. And I've set out some of the key issues that you can take from that. It's quite a lengthy document, although I have put the link to it in the report. But some of the key things they say about timescales are that they think initial assessment of any complaint should be carried out within 15 days of it being received, 15 working days. That investigations should generally be completed within 6 months of an investigator beginning their investigation, although, and I've set out what the guidance says at paragraph 15 on page 14, it does recognise that that won't always be possible because complaints vary significantly from ones that are relatively straightforward to the ones that are complex, but that should be the target, really, the long stop target that investigators should be working towards. And if they can't be completed within that timescale, then the reasons for that need to be recorded, and it should be the exception rather than the rule. And that any hearing of a complaint should take place within 3 months of completion of the final investigation report. So some quite clear guidance on target timescales, recognising that complaints do vary quite considerably. And although it won't always be possible to meet those timescales, they really should be the norm, and it should be very much the exception where those cases, those timescales can't be met. We then went on to look at the council's process and the timelines for decision being made under the process being made by the council in terms of adoption of the process following the implementation of the Localism Act. And that's set out in paragraphs 17 to 26 of our report, which is at pages 15 to 18. I do note that there's some confusion about version control on the council's procedure and what the correct version is, which is obviously slightly concerning, although the issues of change are not necessarily major in substance. But it is important, clearly, that the council is clear on what the current process is and who it was approved by. So that needs to be ensured moving forward if you are minded to make any changes to your process following our recommendations. I think broadly we found that the arrangements are adequate and fairly similar to a lot of other authorities. But we do believe that some improvements could be made and considered, and particularly I don't think the process has been considered alongside the relatively recent LGA model guidance. So we do make some recommendations later in the report that are things you might want to look at in relation to that. Looking specifically at the way complaints have been managed, and particularly ones that have been outsourced through the period between 2020 and now, we set that out at paragraphs 27 to 41 of our report, which is at pages 18 to 23. And there's particularly a table at paragraph 27 of the report, which we've put together based on a spreadsheet provided by the council, setting out the number of complaints and the time that's been taken for them to be dealt with. I'd highlight that the number of complaints that the council's received in that period appears to be significant. It's difficult to benchmark against other local authorities because it hasn't been a requirement since the Localism Act for local authorities to report on the number of complaints received and the time taken to deal with them as it was previously. But from our experience, this does appear to be a high number of complaints, and certainly the information we've been provided with from officers is that it was a significant increase on the amount of complaints which were received prior to 2020. Also, it appears that the time that's being taken on average to deal with all of those complaints is longer than would be considered to be normal or best practice. Although, as I've said, we do note that there are some quite significant contextual factors which have contributed to those timescales. And we've also set out the comments from the CALA report regarding the use of the complaints process. And that's at paragraph 29 on pages 19 to 20 of the report. Also, we were provided with a timeline from officers on particularly the investigations which were outsourced to a firm of solicitors. And that set out some of the difficulties which were experienced by the in-house team, which had an impact on the complaints, and that's set out at paragraph 30 of the report at pages 20 to 21. We then move on at paragraphs 34 and 35 to set out some findings in relation to those outsourced complaints. And I'm sure the solicitors and the firm that dealt with the assessments would acknowledge that these took far longer to deal with than the guidance suggests, than your own procedure suggests in relation to the assessment stage. And I'm sure they would have liked their work to have been completed far more quickly. But again, there are significant contextual reasons and mitigating factors, which I think explain some of the reasons why the timescales were longer than would be anticipated. And we've set out our findings and recommendations at paragraphs 42 onwards in the report. I've gone through the council's current arrangements and included a table at paragraph 42, which sets out some comments and potential recommendations in relation to that. I don't propose to go through all of those, but happy to answer any questions you might have about that table and the comments. I think in any event, it would be sensible for the council, and it may well already have plans to do this, to review its procedure against the LGA guidance to see whether there are any changes and improvements that can be made to strengthen the arrangements that the council has. And perhaps looking also at other councils' arrangements to see if there are any things that can be taken from those to improve the process. As I've said, I set out at paragraphs 49 to 50 on page 28. I do think that the council was not as proactive as it could have been in managing the complaints that were outsourced. And at paragraph 50, I've made some recommendations as to how I think the council can be more proactive in doing that if it does outsource these types of investigations in the future, by agreeing clear deadlines with the external provider at the outset in terms of when the investigation will be completed, making sure that there's a person in the monitoring officer team who is responsible for monitoring progress with the provider, and that's done on at least a monthly basis in terms of getting an update on the progress of the investigation against the deadline which has been agreed. And that if there is any delay beyond the 6-month period recommended in the LGA model guidance, that should be reported to this committee together with the reasons as to why it's taking longer than it should have done to complete. But page 29 in the following paragraphs, I go on to make some further recommendations. One is, if it's not already done, that this committee receives an annual report on complaints handling, number of complaints received, the broad nature of those complaints, how long they're being taken to complete. And that then forms part of an annual report to full council, which is quite common for local authorities to have a standards committee report to full council if you don't already. And it's used, given that it is a significant issue in relation to the governance of any local authority, how it manages complaints that it's received against members, that's proactively used in the preparation of your annual governance statement. We then go on to say that clearly, I don't know whether resourcing has been a factor in this. Clearly, the changes in the in-house team and some of the issues identified in the Cala report have been, but any council obviously needs to make sure that it has the resources in place to deal with any complaints. I don't know the cost of the externalisation of these investigations, but having carried them out myself, I can imagine it was fairly considerable. So I think that the council, if it hasn't already done so, should look at the resources that it has available to deal with these matters and make sure that it's adequate so that the council can manage them in a proactive way. I then go on paragraph 53 to make a recommendation in the light of the comments about the deputy monitoring officers not having limited experience of dealing with these types of matters, to make sure that they're provided with training on assessing complaints and carry out investigations, to ensure that they've got the skills and the training to ensure that they can do that and are confident of doing that. It was mentioned that some of the complaints that were externalised for assessment, which is more unusual than externalising complaints for investigation in my experience, was done because there was a potential conflict with the monitoring officer. And certainly in relation to one of the complaints, it did appear to relate to issues involving the monitoring officer, so that's understandable. I'm not sure why in that case the assessment wasn't carried out by one of the deputy monitoring officers rather than being externalised, but obviously that's a decision for the council. But if that situation does arise and a deputy monitoring officer is dealing with an assessment of a complaint or management of a complaint, then I would recommend that deputy monitoring officer then, to ensure that the monitoring officer is kept clear of the process and any conflict, that the deputy monitoring officer then would report directly on that issue to the chief executive or other appropriate senior officer if the chief executive was conflicted. And then finally, I make recommendations about member oversight and quarterly reporting on complaints. I note later on your agenda, you've got a report about complaints, so maybe you've already put in place some of those arrangements. But I think it is really important that you as a standards committee have a clear line of sight about how these complaints are being managed and dealt with. Not getting involved in the individual detail and outcomes, unless, of course, you're dealing with a hearing following an investigation, but you do have reassurance that the procedures that you have are working in practice and receive regular updates to satisfy yourself of that. So that's a summary of the report, my findings and recommendations, but I'm happy to answer any questions that members may have on any of that.
Thank you, Simon. Councillor Dunn.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I'd just like to thank Simon for what is a very clear report, which clearly sets out where we've gone wrong in the past and the ways that we can put this right going forward. So I think it's a really valuable report for us to take on board here. I've got a couple of questions. One is the finance and the resources, and I totally agree with that. And the question is probably not for Simon, but it's rhetorical, really. How can this committee keep track that the council is actually putting these finances in where we need for the additional resources for this committee? And the second one is for Simon, and it's page 25. Can you just clarify that one for me, Simon, please, where it says, I'm in the middle, where it says this is unusual and, in our opinion, inappropriate. It's page 25 of the report.
Sorry, which paragraph is that?
It's, if there is a finding of evidence of failure to comply with the code, the MO, after consultation with the IP, may, and it says, seek local resolution. And then it's got, this is a standard approach, but there is a discretion on the MO not to refer to a hearing. And it's just your explanation of that. It's paragraph 42.
Sorry, I'm just finding that. I think it wasn't clear to me on what basis the MO would not refer it to a hearing if there'd been an investigation and a failure to comply with the code. And I've not seen that in any other process. Now, it may be there's a local reason as to why that was put in there and in what circumstances it was felt to be appropriate. But I couldn't understand what that was. So I think if you haven't got a situation where there's a resolution, but you've got an investigation report which says there's a failure to comply with the code, that should come to members. So that was why I was a bit concerned about that paragraph. But it may be that there's a reason behind it, and there's an explanation of the circumstances in which it would be appropriate to be used. But I think if there is, that should be set out more clearly.
I think it's a valid question, and certainly if we move forward with this report as a guideline as to how we're going to improve what's going on, that will be part and parcel of that process, so that that's clarified, so that members are fully aware of what will and will not go to hearing. Councillor.
Sorry.
Oh, sorry, Simon.
Sorry, I just think Gillian's got a hand up.
Gillian.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just to come in on this point, I mean, obviously I'm speculating as to why the wording is like that. But from my point of view as a monitoring officer, What I think works with a good procedure is, first of all, the monitoring officer can weed out the pointless and hopeless complaints that are never going to go anywhere. So, for example, complaints that are about something that occurred before somebody took up office. We shouldn't be having a massive machinery to deal with those. As a monitoring officer, you're also always looking for a local resolution to the issues. The way that you can deal with a complaint by perhaps bringing the parties together and getting them to understand each other's position. So I wonder whether that phrase is not that the monitoring officer can decide there's been a breach and then decide they're not doing anything with it, but the monitoring officer can find an alternate way of resolving it, perhaps through an apology. But the clarity of the wording, I think I agree with Simon, could be improved.
Yeah.
Does that to some extent
Yes.
answer your question,
Yeah.
Councillor? Thank you. Councillor Grimshaw.
Thank you very much, Chair. It's just a comment, and perhaps Simon can enlighten me a little bit with this. It's there again on page 26, and it's the very bottom paragraph, and it's revision. And I just wonder if you can, just extend the explanation about the ability of the Chair to depart from the arrangements isn't clear. And the bottom paragraph is, and at a committee meeting, is arguably unlawful. Could you just explain a little bit more about that, please, Simon, if you're able to?
Yeah, sure. Basically, there's case law that a chair of a committee, important though they are, cannot make decisions because decisions can only be delegated to a committee if they're non-executive decisions, as these are. So I think most councils get round that in terms of procedure for pre-hearing decisions, having a consultation with the chair and the monitoring officer, and then setting out that process. And obviously the chair can manage the way things happen in a meeting, but arguably saying the chair can make a decision to depart from the process, well, that appears to be an individual member decision, which for a non-executive function you can't delegate to a single member.
Thank you. I just think he's an invaluable part of this committee, and with the knowledge and experience he's got, and it was just the wording didn't sound very nice. That was all.
It certainly wasn't.
But
No.
Obviously as well, I do agree as well, and thank you for the report, like my colleague stated. And yes, that was one of my questions as well. That Liz picked up one about the finance, but I'm also delighted as well, and I hope that we're updated. And I know the monitoring officers had difficult decisions and things to make, and we have had various, monitoring officers in and out with the training. But with the training, hopefully it would commence immediately, and then could we be obviously updated of the progress of their abilities to be able to look at these as well, to assist the monitoring officer with the complaints that come in. So I would like to, be reassured about that. But apart from that, I think it's absolutely wonderful, the report that you've given, and I'm delighted that there are areas of that has been tightened up, and where the recommendations will be to alleviate the long outstanding complaints that are still in situ, and obviously the people that are involved, they'll be thankful as well, because it will be a lot less than what it has been. But once again, thank you very much. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks for your comments, Councillor. I would just say that you've directed that to Simon and to some extent to Gillian. The reality is it's up to us. We're the ones that are going to have to bring this in. If we accept the recommendations of this, I think the thing that you mentioned, which is timescale, is important. So when we come to the recommendations, that's probably something we'll need to look at. Suki.
Thank you, Chair. Members, I just, for your benefit, just like to take a step back and say these arrangements that Simon reviewed were put in place before I arrived, before the other Brit memos arrived, and also before the Deputy Monitoring Office got involved in complaints. They were put in very early after the Localism Act and approved by full council, and they haven't been reviewed since then. So I think that should give you some context that, we've been running with the process that hasn't been reviewed, was adopted, before some of us arrived. And so some of the questions that you've asked, why was some wording put in there and what was the meaning of that? We've got no legacy of understanding why. We've gone through council reports to understand why it was just adopted at full scale. So I hope that gives you some context as to where we've been with these arrangements. And as a team, we have wanting to change these arrangements for some time, but we were in the middle of ongoing complex matters, so we couldn't change the processes. And so I'm really grateful for Gillian and Simon to bring such a clear report and clear recommendations. And I know the team also are grateful for this report.
Thanks, Suki. If I could just add, yes, it was some time ago since that came into being, at a time where we were trying to understand and put in place the best way forward to deal with standards at the outset of the Localism Act. A lot of things we got wrong, and I'll not deny that, and I am part of that legacy. This is a golden opportunity for us to reset that. And that's what we intend to do.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And your words there about resetting and golden opportunity are well founded. So I welcome the review and the way it's been carried out, and I totally agree with your desktop and remote review, the way you carried out. Excellent way of doing that. Thank you. What I'd like to see built in is an annual review where we take time with officers to seriously consider, because there may be changes nationally and locally, and maybe certain triggers coming out, and one may well be elections, or another one may be social media changes. So I'd like to make sure we have a serious review every year, and it's not just, no disrespect to any committee and any council, but it may just rubber stamp things. We need to look at that in a serious context. Also training, and agree with colleagues across there about they have to have some resources, and if needs be, money ploughed into this area. So we'd like to reassure the public that things have changed, and we're going to do that by improving the subjects area, which will reduce stress upon complainants and members alike. So training, not just for us in the committee, but for other people, would be town and parish councillors. So also a clear triage system to do away with, hopefully, weed out frivolous and malicious or repetitive complaints as well. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. I think that we were acutely aware that there is likely to be a substantial issue in the front loading of complaints and looking at them, and as you say, weeding out. There is a resource intensity involved in that, which is one of the reasons that you very wisely, in my opinion, have decided to have 3 independent people who can work with the Moreton officers team, so we can actually do exactly that. We can start looking at these situations and start looking at them in a way in which we can actually sort the wheat from the chaff to some extent. It's not the best expression, but it will do for this purpose. And I think you're quite right. It is something that needs to be built into what we do on the back of this report and the recommendations of this report. Councillor.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you very much, Chair. Councillor Stewart covered a couple of things I wanted to say there, but I'll still probably cover them anyway, and 1 or 2 other things. One of the key things, Simon, who's gone, he's up there, mentioned was that we should be fair to all parties, and I totally agree with that. And mentioned other things like the goalposts being moved, the volume of complaints, the number of allegations, why complaints process, the way the complaints process was being used. And what there seems to be here is, yes, I understand it's all about members as such, but Councillor Stewart mentioned about weeding out, spurious complaints, basically. So, you know, there's a great volume of complaints on the table on page 19. A lot of them have been resolved by now. And it's hard to say, or that people will say, well, oh yes, this was a weak complaint, a spurious complaint, whatever. But, you know, there needs to be something that covers what, if anything, is done to deal with, you know, the possibility of spurious complaints. Because if not, people just put them in here, there, everywhere, willy-nilly and what have you. And, you know, there's also talk about that these complaints took far longer than would be best practice to resolve or to come to some form of conclusion. And that's fine. As an ex-mental health champion for the council, I've got to look at how people are affected by this, how people who have received complaints about them, how it affects them. I know one person who's already left the council, and I know other people who were very close to doing that. And it's a long process to be under for a year, 18 months to a year, however. And so it's all right saying, well, you know, there's reasons for something's gone over your 15 days, your 6 months and all that. But it's very important, and I think it needs to be addressed, is that if people are making, I'm not saying they have, but if people are alleged or found to be making spurious complaints, what do we do about that? Or do we just let these complaints come in one after the other? Because, I mean, that's, you know, there's a lot of people suffer badly with the effect of these complaints. Now, if it's justified, well, you know, that's their fault. There's one way of looking at it, but sometimes it's not justified.
I think probably there are two areas to look at. There is the area that we need to look at as part and parcel of this important review, and that is that we set the processes in place so that we do determine what is a spurious allegation and find an appropriate means by dealing with it. But beyond that, if somebody is continually making complaints, then there is a more legal process that would follow a vexatious complaint process. And I think that would be something that we would need to look at and explore. Councillor, come back.
And that's good to hear that. But I'm not actually, haven't seen evidence of that actually happening, because I know there's been lots of complaints withdrawn or found weak, should we say, and I'm not aware, maybe it's just because I'm just not aware, and it has happened, but I'm not aware that any form of action has been taken these who repetitively make them spurious complaints, one after the other, after the other, after the other.
I agree entirely with what you're saying, but that's the whole point of this process. We put our hands up, we accept the fact that things have occurred that were not suitably, well, let's say palatable. They weren't right. We need to get this right, and we need to get it right now. And what you need to be assured of as members is that we have a process, and this document gives us a guidance. It gives us a way forward. But what you need to be assured of is that that's going to be implemented, and it's going to be implemented as quickly as possible, and that you are given the time frame that that comes up in. And I think if we do accept the recommendation for this to go forward, we will have to come up with a timescale for you to say this will be in place by.
Thank you. Just going, you know, just adding on to what one of my colleagues said there, I hope that if some of these people who are repeatedly, you know, doing this and putting complaints in, perhaps just for so that they'll go away and not say anything more that they might be upset about, I do think that if it's continuous, that perhaps the standards should, perhaps, or the chair or someone should speak to that person, because take note of how many complaints and what they're actually complaining about, and to see what substance there is around it, or is it just a threat for perhaps for them not ask questions, etc. So I would like something built in like that as well, because we know we've all been in that predicament, as you know, as to say, well, being threatened with standards, etc. And indeed, some of us has been in that unfortunate position who have been, you know, had complaints against people and are upsetting the longevity of how long it takes, and you know, the worry that they're under, even though they haven't done anything and they know they haven't, it's still very, it's horrible. It's a horrible feeling, because I know from experience, and I know one or two colleagues have as well, and no doubt, you know, on the opposition sides as well. So yes, it's imperative to get it right and resolved as quickly as possible. So, you know, I'm totally, you know, I hope we're all in, you know, in favour of that. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Sorry, Gillian, I didn't see your raised hand, largely because I'm blind. If you could come in, thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just listening to the debate there, I'll just offer some observations from outside and from my role on the challenge board. You are, of course, all of you correct that what you're doing here is you're balancing speed and fairness. So any process has to be fair. It has to be fair to all parties, but it also has to come to a conclusion as quickly as is possible to do justice to the circumstances. So you will always be balancing that. The second point I would make is in relation to repeated complaints or vexatious complaints, call them what you will. One of the things that we have in my authority is I have a set of filter criteria against which I assess complaints. One of the things that I look for is whether there's been a similar complaint. So is it something that we've dealt with before and seen before? Is there any evidence of vexatious behaviour? Is it a tit for tat type complaint, or is it in fact so long ago that it's not in the public interest to take it forward now, especially if it's going to take a long time and a lot of resources? I would always mark why I am filtering complaints out, and I can filter them out on that basis. When I do my annual report to the Standards Committee, who then forward it on to our Audit and Governance Committee, we report on one of those criteria. We report on what we've been doing with that. For me, it's come in the context of a parish council where they've been complaining against each other and then complaining about the way they complained about each other. And so ultimately, using those criteria, I wrote to the council and said I would not accept any more complaints about the same subject. So that's how I've dealt with it. So there are options available to you. And if you are going to review your processes, and if there is not challenge board involvement at that stage, I've made it clear to Suki and I've made it clear to your incoming monitoring officer that I am available if you just want to run anything past me.
That's extremely reassuring, Gillian. Thank you very much. It's a very kind offer, and I'm sure we will take you up on that. Members, do we have any further comment or question in relation to the report?
Well,
Councillor.
just one, thank you very much. And actually it looks rather positive because you can see from 2022 to 23 the significant drop of complaints. So that's, that's since the Cala report and the challenge board, etc., and everybody working hopefully as a team. So that's very, very encouraging as well because, now you can get on hopefully and quicken up the process of those complaints that you have that are more serious. So that it's just a comment, Chair. Thank you.
I welcome the comment, but with all comments, there is a caveat. And yes, that's very positive. But the underlying scenario has been, and we've recognised it as Chair, as the officers have, that there is an issue. Cala highlighted it. The board has proactively looked to get this report put together independently. It didn't come from us, it came from the advisory board. But what I would suggest to you is it's a tremendous template to move us forward, and certainly to go down that line that Cala suggested, whereby we actually put our foot on the ball and we reset, coming back to Councillor Stewart's comment. Just like to ask if Suki, Simon or Gillian would like to add anything further before we actually conclude business on this item.
Not from me, Chair.
Thank you.
No, from me, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you.
No, not from me.
Thank you. That being the case, the report is extensive. The item relates to a series of recommendations for consideration by yourselves. The first one, I think, is fairly standard, but we will go through the process. And that recommendation is to receive the review in relation to the way in which the Council has dealt with its Code of Conduct complaints. Could I have Councillor Stewart and seconded by Councillor Flux? Do I need a vote or do we take that unanimously? Unanimously.
Great, Chair.
Thank you. We then go on to the second recommendation, which is a two-parter. Always like multiple choice. We then need to decide whether or not to, one, accept the findings of the desktop report or not to accept the findings. Now, what I would say to you, members, is that we accept it all or we accept nothing. There's no picking and choosing here. Is that...
I was going to make a formal proposal that we accept 2.2.1, and I see that Councillor Grimshaw has got her hand up, and I think it'd be useful to have a cross-party seconding of that, and I would quite happily accept her seconding if that's what she's doing.
Thanks, councillors. So we now go on to 2.3. These recommendations have now been accepted by yourselves in a proper process. We need to now start to look at agreeing a timeline for the implementation of this. Neil, do you have any thoughts on that?
I was just going to ask for a formal vote on 2.2.1, Chair. We had to move...
Oh, sorry. Yes, sorry. I assumed unanimity, but can we have a vote on 2.2.1 where we are agreeing to that recommendation? Can I have a vote? Thank you. Unanimous. Right, apologies. 2.3. Recommendations have been accepted. We need to look at the timescale for implementation. Any thoughts, Neil?
I think, Chair, it would be reasonable to expect a report at the next Standards Committee. I'm not sure what date that would be, Leslie.
July. It's on the agenda. 13th of July.
Yeah.
Sorry, is that feasible? Because we want it to be finite, if you like. If you believe it's feasible, then we will schedule it for that meeting. Oh, sorry, Suki.
Chair and members, I think that is feasible. I'm doing a detailed handover with Stephen Gerard. He joins us on the 5th of June. We can start the work now and he can take it forward. So we've got plenty of time. So I do think it's feasible. And if it's not, we find it's not, we will let you know why it's not feasible. But I would like us to adopt this as soon as possible so we can move with the new processes and procedures with clarity.
Thank you, Suki. Thank you, Neil. Members, are you happy that we bring this back to the next meeting, which is scheduled for the 13th of July?
Agreed.
I think I need a proposer.
Propose it.
Councillor Slooks and Vilcek as proposer and seconder. Can I have a show? Thank you very much, members. That was a substantial piece of work. What I'd like to do is thank Gillian for the advisory board's view and context and for then appointing Simon, and then thank Simon for his incredible work in relation to this. It may well be easy to say you aren't doing it right. The more difficult thing is to say, how do you do it right? And I think the report very, very much puts us into a position whereby we can move forward positively into the future. So again, thank you both for that.
Thank you.
If I could, Gillian and Simon, you're welcome to continue to watch proceedings if you so wish, but I would imagine you have more important top-level things to be getting on with than listening to the ramblings of a Northumbrian.
Thank you, Chair. If you don't mind, we would like to be excused. We both have got other appointments. Thank you.
We're grateful for your time and for your efforts. Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.
If we could then move on to item 5, which is the report in relation to the Code of Conduct's progress. As was alluded to in the last item, you will note that the new report is a bit more bells and whistles, has a lot more to it, and has a great deal more explanation, certainly in Appendix 2. What I should caveat this with is the pictures of the graphs. They relate specifically to complaints about county councillors, because we kind of did it as a bit of a pilot to see how well it worked. So we haven't got the parish councillors involved in that. But in the second, more important appendix, it covers both county and parish councillors. So bear that in mind when looking at the report. I'm not sure, Suki or Neil, do you want to speak to it? Suki, do you want to speak to this report, please?
I can do, Chair, if you wish. So, members, as Chair has stated to you, this is a new style. If I just take you to Appendix 1, that sets out the County Council complaints that we've received by year and by whom, and you will see that there's an awful lot in 2021 that were received from councillors and officers, and the public was the lowest number there. Then we also then go on to the second page, which illustrates the type of complaints that we have received, and you will note respect is very high, bullying, harassment and discrimination. And again, in the years that we received those, 2022 and 2021 and 2020 being the highest number again. And the third graph, members, shows you the trend of that they, as we, the graphs 1 and 2 are showing you, we had high numbers in 2021 and 2022, 2022 being the peak. And I think, Councillor Grimshaw, you're absolutely right. It has really come down in 2023. Appendix 2 then gives you further detail of the complaints in the year and the status of those complaints. And you will note there have been a number of those that have closed. There are still a number that are ongoing, but we have managed to get through these swiftly and quickly since the Cala report with a team approach on this. So, members, I'm happy to take questions if you have any on those. This is a report, as Simon has said, that should be coming to you annually, but we in Northumberland actually bring it quarterly, and that's what we intend to continue to do. And Stephen will do that as well. In the report itself, members, there. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yep.
Oh, sorry, I was just getting an echo. I am getting an echo. That's better. Paragraph 6 of the cover report does give you a summary of the current position. We have 16 complaints outstanding, and these include parish and county council, and it gives you the status of those complaints as well. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Sesford.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Suki. If you look at the one on page 56, the type of complaints, there's obviously one lot jumps out more than most of the others. And this is sort of a link back to what we were just talking about in the previous item. Looking at this could say that we have a serious problem in one particular area, but what we don't know is how many of these are being resolved, either because they were, going back to that word I used before, spurious or the weak or whatever, or whether in fact these were all there's all a case to answer for this particular one. So that information alongside that would make it sort of better reading as to is there a real problem on the bottom section, or is this one of the areas where there were a lot of spurious weak complaints?
So, Chair, through you, the Appendix 2 then does go into detail, but I can see that it's quite difficult to tell which ones have been closed in respect of the bullying and harassment. And they weren't frivolous complaints. Some of these complaints were complaints by senior officers who have left, and those, and some were withdrawn of those, and some there was no case to answer. but they were in themselves complaints that were complex and complicated. And that's what that spike and that bullying and harassment relates to. On Appendix 2, you will see that those complaints have closed now, and some as recently as the 13th of last week, actually, the 13th of April. So those matters, that what we call the legacy matters in our team, have actually come to a close. And what we have seen recently, a number of complaints increased by the public and in respect of parish councils. Very few are coming through from Northumberland County Council, and when they are, they actually are members of the public. With regard to the complaints being made by councillors, we have actually got a toolkit which filters tit for tat, filters repetitive complaints, but also members themselves are saying to us that we'd like to bring something to your attention, but we don't want to bring a complaint. And as a monitoring officer, we think you should be aware of certain types of behaviour that potentially could be a breach of the code. We do keep those matters on our spreadsheets just to see if there is a repetitive behaviour or types of potential breaches of the code. And we then do actually also bring those up to group leaders, whips. We have ethical framework meetings that are set with each group, and we do actually discuss some types of behaviour that perhaps their members are doing, and actually it has worked quite effectively, because sometimes it's just a conversation and it's just because people don't know that their behaviour perhaps is affecting somebody in a certain way, or what they've said or what they've done or what they failed to declare. As you know, since Cala in the team, we have been working collaboratively with members, and that's what we want to continue to do. And I know Stephen Gerard will want to do the same. You heard Gillian to say that sometimes the best way to deal with these is actually to have a conversation and seek a local resolution.
Thanks, Sugi. That's good to hear.
Thanks, Councillor. Councillor Dunn.
Thank you, Chair. Just really glad to see the decline in the number of complaints going forward. And I think, you know, it just underlies the fact that we're talking about in the last item, where it's down to education of members and an understanding of the code of conduct and actually what you can put into a complaint before you raise it. And the fact that these things can be, sort of behaviour issues can be brought to the monitoring officer beforehand on an informal thing is great. Just going back to what Suki said, we're now seeing some parish council complaints. I think that just underlies or emphasises the fact that we need to bring the parishes and the parish councillors into any training that we do have, because it all filters down and affects the parish councils as well. So I think that's really important. What I would like to say is, I know this is going down and everything, but what we really don't want to do is discourage anybody from putting in a genuine complaint, and that's where we have to make it very clear as well. So that you know, that has to be at the forefront as well. So thank you.
As usual, sage thought. In agreeing with you, absolutely. I think we have to be realistic in terms of the resource and implication. There are huge numbers of parish councillors, quite a few numbers of parish and town councils. So I think we need to have a good cogent plan that comes back to what both Councillor Stewart and Cessford said about making sure the resources are in place, that the training's in place. And that is going to take some thinking about. You know, best will in the world, resources are scarce. I have always said that I'm a resource that's available. Even when I'm not here, I will be a resource that's available if the county thinks that I'm useful. Thank you. Councillor.
Sorry, just to come back on that, I do attend NALC meetings, and I know that they're considering having an annual conference. Off the top of my head, I think it might be the 7th of October or something. But if that's the whole day event that they're having, then that would seem to be quite an opportune place to have somebody you know, some little bit of training in there. So maybe sort of liaison with NALC about that might be good.
I think it's a splendid idea. Can we investigate that, Neil?
Certainly, Chair.
And I'm happy to attend. More than happy to attend.
And
Councillor.
Chair, can I just...
Sorry, it's just...
On that point, you also sent me an email recently because you'd had a conversation with somebody about joining training. Sorry, I'm getting real feedback here. So I have put it on my list to talk to Graham from NALC. And I think, Chair, you were talking to somebody at a parish. You went to one of your meetings. And you sent me an email asking me to action that. So I have actioned it with Graham. We just haven't been able to get hold of him to come to one of our meetings. He's quite fairly busy. So it is on our list. And it's a really, really good point, Councillor Dunn, because it really does make a difference, the training. And we actually do say to clerks that they should be giving regular training to their parish councillors. And we can offer to help, but as you know, there are too many for us. You know, we just don't have the resource to do the training for them, and they do pay a fee to NALC.
Thanks, Suki. Councillor.
Thank you. Just going on, you know, from my colleague, yes, as a majority of us are town and parish councillors too, and NALC does excellent training because and have periodically put up what kind of training they provide. But you can also request specific training if it is indeed on the code of conduct, etc. I'm sure if we liaised with the town and parish councils, that's as imperative for to get this training. Then the town and parish clerks will indeed facilitate that through NALC. Thank you,
Thank you, Councillor. We'll build up on that. Thank you. Unless there's any further questioning in relation to the report, the recommendation here is simply to receive the report. Can I have a proposer?
The recommendation, Chair.
Thank you. And a seconder? Thank you, Councillor. If we move on to item number 6, which is in relation to the dispensation element of the Localism Act. Is that you, Neil, or is that Suki? Sorry. Suki, if you could just go through that and explain to members what we're seeking to achieve here, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I will. Members, the last few months, I have had some of our fellow colleagues approach me with regard to concerns for their safety, and also some members of the public having details, you know, of their home addresses. And some of our councillors actually have been quite terrified and intimidated by some members of the public. And they would like to withdraw their addresses from the website. Unfortunately, I can't grant a dispensation. The committee grants them. It's not been delegated to me. In other authorities, I have granted dispensations. But I have also discussed this with my relevant portfolio holder, Councillor Wearmouth, and he is also of agreement that we should actually be protecting our councillors and also be looking to try and not to disclose their home addresses. And if they don't wish to disclose their home addresses, the issue is it's under the Act that we have to have your addresses, but we don't need to have them published if you grant a dispensation, but we will keep your addresses on the hard copy that we keep of your register. The proposal is not for this committee to make that decision, but to offer, as they have done in other local authorities, offer the opportunity to our wider members for their views and thoughts, whether they wish to have a one-by-one dispensation. So they approach me and I then approach you, or we delegate it to the monitoring officer to do those one-by-one dispensations and keep a note of those and bring them back to you for oversight, or whether we wish to go for a blanket policy, which means everybody is granted that dispensation and we don't publish their addresses on the website, but it's reviewed annually, which it must be. and the last option is not to do anything and just to leave matters as they are. So that's the three proposals, Chair, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Councillor Sesford first and then Councillor Grimshaw.
Thank you, thank you very much, Chair. Yes, I think it's important to take some action out here. I'm aware of a local councillor who was visited by somebody known to the people in here at their own home, which is certainly not appropriate. However, some people do like or don't have an issue with their addresses on, and I think it should be an individual thing. If somebody wants their address removed from public viewing, then they should allow to have it at the drop of a hat, because there'll be reasons for that. But if others want to leave it on, so I think that was Suki's second recommendation that I would be supporting, where it's a personal choice thing whether I have it on or don't have it on.
Sorry, Councillor Grimshaw.
Sorry, I don't know if Suki wanted to come back in first. Did you?
Sorry,
No,
Suki,
no,
do you want to come back in?
No, please go ahead, Councillor Grimshaw. I'll sum up at the end.
Thank you. Well, I definitely think that it maybe it's a touchy subject because you know that as councillors, not only locally but nationally as well, as MPs etc. has been challenged and horrible things happen, and you know hopefully that will never happen in Northumberland. And it is a funny situation because I know it's up to, I think, every individual councillor if they want to or they don't want to, and I don't know what my colleagues think of it, whether to say, well, you know, we'll just put it out there to say, right, there's no information given out on people's declarations of interest. I think that's personal, and it maybe should be taken further for all the members to be able to agree or disagree with it. But that's just my personal and humble opinion. But, you know, it's got to be looked at because of the current situation, unfortunately, that we live in now. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor. The recommendation on this isn't to determine which of those options.
Yes.
The recommendation is to take the options that Suki's outlined to the council membership in a defined period, and then come back and let yourselves know the way in which they would like to go forward, and then we can make our decisions thereafter.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. But it was just a comment, you know, to say that we're living in a very, well, unhealthy, state of affairs now, with a lot of people being attacked, and for whatever reason, because I know some people are very frustrated with perhaps the way things are going in their circumstances. But yes, I think it eventually does need to be addressed because it's very important. It was just a comment. It wasn't, for to say that, agree with anything.
Thank you, Councillor, and apologies for my misunderstanding. Councillor Flux and then Councillor
It's
Dunn.
a question about the blanket option. Now, my instinct is that I would prefer the blanket option, because it seems to me that we're not actually being asked. The blanket option doesn't mean we'll just go and get a black pen and redact it from every single statement the day we do it. It gives the monitoring officer and the team the opportunity to do it for everyone, rather than us having to come back on every individual case. And I would support a blanket view, because if it's on an individual case, it kind of gives more. It highlights it a bit more, and I don't think we'd want to highlight it. If someone was being terrorised by someone, I don't think we'd want to be saying, well, oh, can we exclude councillor so-and-so because of whatever reason. I think I would rather we'd had a blanket situation where the monitoring officer has the ability to just make sure they're not in the public domain but on our hard system, and that can be done quietly rather than trumpeted, so you have to bring it every single time. That was just have I got that correct, is my question, and that's basically my question, really.
Chair, would you like me to respond?
Yes, please.
Yeah. So you're absolutely right, Councillor Flux. If the option comes back and more members would like to have their addresses taken off the website, then the blanket policy, that's what it would be. So whenever you renew your declarations, or after election year, whenever it comes into force, it would just not have your address there. We may even decide just to put Northumberland County Council, but it does mean that every councillor will not have their address shown. It's a really difficult situation because already we've heard 3 different views what people would prefer, what councillors prefer from the Standards Committee, and that's why it is appropriate to consult with members other than the members of this committee and look at what the options are after the consultation. If it comes back to say that it will be an individual, members would prefer the approach of having an individual dispensation. My suggestion, and that would be up to Stephen, is you delegate that to the monitoring officer, so it doesn't come back to this forum, and so that member isn't waiting. Because sometimes the sensitive issue is of the moment, and you wouldn't want to be waiting for a committee, and the monitoring officer could do that themselves, and then review it and report back to you. So, as the chair says, the appropriate way is to consult because we're already hearing different views.
Happy with that?
I'm happy with that, and I think on the back of that, yes, just let's consult on it and come back with some options.
Councillor Dunn.
Thank you. Just getting back to the consultation, I mean, we've got 67 councillors, am I right?
Yeah.
But we've got many, many more parish councillors whose addresses appear on their declarations of interest. So will this filter down to them as well, or will they be part of this consultation?
So it's a really good point, Councillor Dunn. We hadn't thought about, I hadn't specifically thought about parishes, but this is just for our Northumberland County Councils. We can discuss that with NAUC and see whether they would want to. I would assume they will probably leave it to parishes to individually to make that decision. But we are the principal authority for parishes, and we must maintain their register. So it would be up to us to do that. We do want them also to go digital, Councillor Dunn, as well. So because we get hard copies from them. So if we could do some kind of digitalisation with them, as we have done with your declarations of interest, your registers, it would make life a lot easier. But can we take that one away, Chair, and discuss it with Graham and NAUC? But it's a really good point. But the proposal before you today is just for our councillors at Northumberland.
Happy to do so. Are you happy with that answer, Councillor? Councillor Stewart and then Councillor Flux.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. We've been talking about councils here. Can I just remind everybody, it also should mention families, because you're giving the place of abode employment opportunities for partners, spouses, or other people share homes as well. So it has to be very proactive. And I was convinced by Councillor Flux's argument there before. Then I changed that slightly, and I think it should be done more on an individual basis, providing there's not inferences drawn to the point that somebody has taken their addresses off there. Because some people would draw inferences to say, well, hiding from them, they don't actually live in the ward, or some other factor there which will aggravate situations at times.
Pertinent point, Councillor. Thank you.
It was just on the back of Councillor Dunn's very good point, in that many of us, myself included, are a double hatter, and I'm on the town council, and it'd be pretty daft if my details were retracted as a county councillor but still on there as a town councillor, and I just wanted to make that point.
Do you want to come back on that, Sugi?
They are really good points, and when I draft the consultation, we'll actually make that point. If you're a twin hatter, then we'll probably distinguish that and probably change your parish council declaration as well for it to cover that as well, Councillor Flux, because we are the principal authority. But let me just work through how that would work. And with regard to your good point also about highlighting, as Councillor Stewart was talking, then I was actually thinking what we would do is we would probably, if the option is to do an individual dispensation, we would actually just put Northumberland County Council as their address, our Morpeth office. So it doesn't look like there's a blank there. It will look like that's the address that they've given, and actually, that is acceptable because some local authorities do allow members to do that, but only when they've granted a dispensation.
Thank you, Suki. Does that cover?
Yes, thanks, Chair.
Councillor Sessford.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, most councillors within their own area are known anyway, so a lot of people will know where they live, whether it's a double hatter, whether a parish councillor as well as a county councillor. A lot of people will know where they live, not everyone. But, you know, in a kid's situation, I mentioned before, somebody travelled 30-odd miles to knock at somebody's door. That's not acceptable at all. On about parish councillors and councillors, when they stand for election, they fill in their forms, election forms, and they have a right not to have their address shown on this. I've just seen Suki say not anymore. Right, okay, well, I didn't know that. So I'm sure Suki can clarify.
I think it was Councillor Flux that told me that.
Yeah, they changed that 3 or 4 years ago, any of us who've been election agents, that we used to have your address on no matter what, and now you can put address in Northumberland.
Okay, well, I'll just leave that last point out. But the first point, you know, it is relevant, the first point, because, you know, nobody's hiding as a local parish councillor, nobody's hiding as a local county councillor. People know where you are, you meet, you have surgeries, whatever. But those people who are coming outside the area and travelling a long distance to see you, know, that's something to be worried about and concerned about, because they've seen the address on the website.
I think that is a point well made and is noted, Councillor. Councillor Stewart.
Quite a simple subject, but it seems to be getting lots of questions here as well. So can I just ask you to consider outside bodies as well, such as the North of Tyne, linking all those, because if somebody's trying to identify a councillor from this authority or any other authority and they can't find it here, they could quite easily find an outside body.
Let me, yeah, that's a really, sorry, Chair, can I come back? Yeah, it's a good, yes. Let me just work through that. I've got that, you know, this is really helpful having this discussion, and it's really useful. So I've taken that one down as well, Councillor Stewart, and let me work through how that would work. And I'll also put that in the questionnaire about outside bodies as well.
Councillor Flux.
There's an added complication about, sorry, I'm making this bigger, is that sometimes when you're on an outside body, you're actually appointed a formal director. So I've been appointed as a formal director of Museums Northumberland, for example. And that then goes on the government website with your address. And if someone Googles my name, they'll find out exactly where I live, because it'll be on that form. But
you can change that, Councillor Flux.
Yeah.
You can actually put Morpeth Town Hall. If you're nominated by the council to be a director, you could do that. You can actually also probably put their address. So maybe that's one for you to take fine.
I just thought it was something worth us clarifying on that, because some of us will have that address on Company's House because of the appointment we've got as a county councillor.
I think as part of the consultation, Suki's took several additional pieces of notes, and I think we'll try and cover as much as we can. And I think during that consultation period, there's a chance that other matters might arise, and the officer team will work them through so that we can ultimately bring back to yourselves, assuming that you agree the recommendation, a workable situation in relation to this. Does anybody else have any further questions? Suki, would you like to round up, or are you happy to press on?
Happy to press on, Chair.
So the recommendation is, members, it's not numbered, but the recommendation is that we go through a process of consultation with members, with the various caveats that have arisen today, and consult with members in relation to this area of dispensation. I want to try and truncate that as much as I can. Again, I'll ask the question, Neil and Suki. Can we have that in place for the next standards meeting in July?
Yes, Chair, we can.
Excellent. So look forward to it, team. It's coming. So what I need somebody to formally thank you, Councillor Sessford, and seconded by Councillor Wilczek. Do I need a vote? I think
Yeah,
Yes,
it's
please.
unanimous.
Sorry, I was just going to ask for unanimity rather than a
unanimous.
vote, but it is unanimous. Thank you all. Now then, under normal circumstances, I do not allow any other business. But given that I'm the chair, I am going to introduce this particular piece of any other business. There's actually two. One relates to the lady who's just taken her face off the television. And that is obviously to advise that Suki, probably by the time we get to the next meeting, will no longer be working with or for us. I would like to take this opportunity to extend my thanks, and I'm sure the thanks of the team and yourselves, to Suki for all her incredibly hard work during what has been a very difficult period of time, not just for us as a standards committee, but for the entirety of the local authority, be that staff or be that members. She's always conducted herself with a huge level of professionalism in the face of some very, very difficult moments. I've always found her counsel sage, but by the same token, she's been prepared to accept from me when there are things that I'm not happy with. And that is a sign of a good working relationship. We do work well together. And I'm eternally grateful, not just for Suki, but for the team of officers around her. But I would like to extend our thanks formally to Suki for everything that she's done. I'd like to think we don't need to vote on that, but I'm happy to take a proposer. Councillor Sesford and Councillor Flux, thank you very much, and thank you, members. Suki, thank you. I'm sure you will get to see people in due course. I'm certainly looking to try and catch up with you before you leave. But as I say, I'd like to extend my thanks to you on a personal basis and on behalf of the Standards Committee. Thank you very much. And the second piece of...
Thank you. Chair, can I just also add my thanks to you all. You've always been very professional towards me, and and you haven't shied away from challenging the officer's advice, which is really, really healthy sign of a good committee, and a committee that does look deeper than the reports that are just presented to you. And I have enjoyed working with you all. And with you, Chair, I've not come across an independent chair before, and I just think it's absolutely wonderful that Northumberland have got you appointed there, because it just shows the independence and you've been pragmatic, and your sage advice for me has been really, really helpful during a really challenging period for all of us in the monitoring officers team, and we have been grateful for the steer that you've given us, and also grateful for the steer that this committee has given us as well. So my thanks to you all as well. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that, Suki. Unnecessary, but thanks. The second piece of any other business is, to some extent, more personal. Those of you who have not been members of this committee for any great length of time probably aren't aware that some time ago the Standards Committee determined that the tenure of the independent chair would be limited. I have been the chair of this committee before limitation and up until now for in excess of 10 years. It's a period of time that I've thoroughly enjoyed. I've worked with some very, very good elected members, some excellent members of staff, including those today. However, 4 years ago, the Standards Committee of the time determined that the tenure of an independent chair would be 4 years. My 4 years ends in January coming up. So I have 2 more formal meetings, and unless a hearing arrives, unlikely to be involved in any great extent. So what you need to do as a committee in your next 2 meetings is to start the process of thinking about 2 things. One, which I hope you will do anyway, is, do you believe that the role of the independent chair should continue? And I believe it really should. I would always argue for it. And the second issue is, how are you going to go about appointing your next independent chair? So I'll leave that with you to think about for the next meeting. May well be that we put it in as a report, so we can consider it. Right. I think that unless anybody else has got anything else, we can conclude the meeting. Thank you very much for your attendance as usual, all your sage counsel, all your advice and all your questions. We've done good work, I think, today. So thank you very much. And you can close off here.